MyMichelleLive, Entertainment Review. Roll out the red carpet. Here's Michelle.
But not just Michelle. We have the one and only Adam Holtz getting us plugged into the movie.
I'm pretty cool. Plugging you into the movies. This is Adam Holtz.
At least once a week, he gets to be pretty cool. And I'd say we should just give you... You need a raise. You need to get right up to absolutely cool.
I will. I'll tell you where to send the letter in or the email, and we'll see if that happens.
Hey, it's good to connect with you, Mr. Adam Holtz, as we get plugged into the movies. There is actually a lot to talk about, and that's good news.
There's a lot to talk about.
Good news, because it's been slim pickings, and we've been, everyone's watched everything, but there's a lot happening, and even we'll try to get into more of the Plugged In Movie Awards, which is always great for listeners to plug into themselves and give their own opinions on. But first, let's talk about some things coming up. We have at least 4 family films that might be worth a see.
Yeah, let's start with Raya and the Last Dragon. It's spelled Raya, but it's pronounced Raya. And Disney was kind enough to send me a screener, but apparently they don't trust me completely yet because it didn't work on my computer. So I had to watch it on my phone. So first I watched a movie for work on my phone. It was probably a smaller experience than they're hoping people have. This is a movie that is in theaters, and if you have Disney Plus, you can pony up $29.99 and watch it. And honestly, this movie might be worth that if you got a couple kids in your family.
Really?
Watching it. Yeah, this is the newest Disney princess, Raya, and it's set in a land that is not China, but is very much like China. It has a Chinese kind of vibe to it. It's an incredibly complex plot, so I will simplify it and say that Raya is a princess who teams up with the Last Dragon, hence the title, and they have to find shards of a crystal that are spread out throughout 5 warring nations that used to be one nation, put them back together to be able to fend off these monsters that are turning everyone to stone. That's the really short version. It's actually significantly more complicated than that, but that'll do for our purposes. This was a delightful movie. I really, really enjoyed it.
Wow.
There's some magic and some Chinese sort of mythology, but and that I think is really a big problem in any way from that point of view. And, a little bit of mild peril. Some people get turned to stone. Some people get turned back into flesh from being turned into stone. Terrific movie about the importance of trust, of forgiveness, of giving people a second chance, even when they've let us down. And really almost not a Christian movie at all, but it almost has this sense of, if you could undo the sin that separates us, what kind of a world would we have? Now, they don't use the word sin, but we see them treating each other badly and then being reunited. So I think you could run all kinds of directions with this movie in terms of spiritual messages.
There you go. You work with Paul Acey. I've said this about him. The dude can spiritualize freaking burnt toast.
No, I mean, we could drop
Is that true?
Block on his head and Paul would have a spiritual connection. Actually, when I saw this movie, I thought, I have to tell Paul about this. He's not reviewing it. Kristen Smith reviewing it, because I thought, Paul could write a book on this movie. He would have a field day.
That's glorious. I'm so glad you agree with me on that. Yeah, Paul is amazing that way.
I actually had that thought.
And that's really good news. Even with some of the controversy that Disney gets itself into politically, when they put out product, they have a formula and it works. And I think they're smart enough monetarily to know if they don't mess with that formula, they're going to do well.
Right. And, I think we have sort of the traditional collection of Disney princesses, and over the last I don't know, roughly 20 years. I mean, you could probably go back to even Mulan in the 90s. It's sort of the next generation of Disney princesses. And I've read a couple reviews that says that that Raya really is one of the best new ones. And I would agree with that.
Okay.
I really, really enjoy her character. They kind of remind me, the way they did it kind of reminds me of Rey from Star Wars. And there are a number of scenes where she's almost in a treasure hunting mode. It's got, at certain points, almost a Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of flair to it as well. So it's one, and I don't say this very often. After I see a movie, I want to take my family to it. So I guess that's probably a pretty high recommendation. But as always, you'll want to read our full review and just make sure that it's okay for your family, although I don't think there are any huge deal killers here.
You know, I actually would like to see Disney do some Disney princes. We've had princess after princess after princess after princess, and we've really ignored young boys, you know, the good characteristics, the brave characteristics, compassion, strength. Why don't we see that?
Why not? That's a great question. And in fact, I'm sure Paul Acey has had that question, but I had not actually thought of it until you brought it up right now. So, I mean, it's funny that we're living in this moment where some blend of equity and equality, and those things are not the same things, and we're not going down that rabbit trail, are sort of front and center in everything that we're dealing with, but we're not Disney princesses. That would be an interesting thing for them to explore. So Disney, if you're listening, you need to give Michelle credit on that one. Maybe a royalty when you do it.
I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't complain.
A royalty for the princess. Get it?
While we're still Disneying right now, you and I have been fans of WandaVision, and I think it's very important to talk about WandaVision this week. WandaVision started out with their series in this very innocent 1950s sitcom, family friendly, almost too over the top. Like, you know, I could just watch Dick Van Dyke reruns if I really wanted to,
right.
You know, but it had an underlying plot that kept drawing you in. Right? If you get past the first couple, you're going, oh, wow, this is great. Okay, I see what's going on here. This last week, you really have to be aware. It is flippin' dark. It's dark. It
is dark. And I mean, okay, very small spoiler warning. There hasn't been much content. I mean, there's been a smattering of language and a little bit of violence as things have ramped up each episode, but not even that much of that. But this last week, all of a sudden, we had massive witchcraft issues that sort of came in out of nowhere. Now, again, this isn't a real big spoiler warning for anybody who knows anything about Wanda Maximoff, because her name in the Avengers for the last 50 years is the Scarlet Witch. So, again, it's not a huge spoiler warning, but I was a little bit surprised that it went as deep into a witchcrafty kind of place as it did. And this week we're having our conversation today before the final episode of season 1 rolls to completion tomorrow. So we're gonna have to see what they did with it. But I agree with you; it definitely took a very dark turn, and one that kind of caught me completely by surprise, actually.
Me too. I guess the light goes off because you're thinking, oftentimes we've been watching WandaVision with family, most of us, right? With families. So if you haven't watched it, or if you have, you may have been like, ooh. And that's why, it's always good to go to Plugged In before, if you can, and just be aware. You can see in some series where they do take it a little darker and a little darker and a little darker. You saw that with the Harry Potter series. It went darker and darker. So WandaVision, if you looked at the at the transition. You could see a little bit of edging, but man, they dropped off the cliff this last one. They really,
Yeah,
really
I thought
did.
so too. And I think it's navigable, but it's certainly ramped up that darkness, or ramped it down, to use your dropped off a cliff phrase, in ways that, again, it really caught me flat-footed. I'm like, whoa, okay, wow, I guess that's where they're going with it.
Yeah, it's wow. So, I'll be interested in seeing what happens this next iteration, this next episode.
Yes.
But something that I would say, as long as we're still in the Disney world, I watched, enjoyed. I've seen it in the past, but it's been long enough I kind of forgot it. And it's Tuck Everlasting.
Oh yeah, it's been a minute since I saw Tuck Everlasting, and if I rewind my mental tapes, it ends up kind of sad, doesn't it? Tell me a little bit more
It
about
ends up a little bit sad, but it's a family from, now I'm thinking, they've been alive. This family's been alive for, 150 years, or 110 years or so. They drank from some spring that gave them, I don't know if it was, they didn't say eternal life, but they became kind of immortal. They just don't die. And so they're actually a really good family. They've had to endure some prejudice of, when they have let their secret out, of people saying, well, you're of the devil, but they don't adhere to anything that seems to be inappropriate. They in fact have a really good outlook on it, and they don't think that this everlasting kind of life on earth is really a good thing. You make room for new people. It's not really life unless you have this circle of life of, you live, then you die, and such. So it's not glorifying that. In fact, they heavily guard the secret because they don't want bad people being able to live forever. Right. The youngest boy falls in love with a local girl whose father owns the woods that they live in. And shenanigans ensue. They have to, yeah. What can you say?
I would just want to stop you there and say, I could put that in every review I have ever written.
That's where you have to.
Ensue. That's great.
Shenanigans ensue. And she has to make the decision if she wants to drink from the well and spend the rest of eternity, so to speak, with him, or give herself to, the natural order of things. So
kind of like Arwen and Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. That was your geek moment of the day, and I liked it. Absolutely, Adam. And
that's why I was not called cool in high school. Now.
But you are very cool now. In fact, can we just do it?
I'm pretty cool.
I know you.
Into the movies. This is Adam Holm.
I know you kind of cringe inside every time I do it, but
no, I just roll with it.
You just roll, buddy. So I won't tell you the ending and give it away, but there is that struggle there. It is well done. In fact, I think one of the pivotal things in the movie is when somebody unrelated to the core of the story dies, and they talk about scripture and their prayers, kind of get her thinking. So
I have a confession to make. I just realized as you started talking that the reason I was reluctant to say anything is because in my head, my grande cabeza here, sorry if I'm appropriating Hispanic culture, forgive me. That's not my, we have to be careful these days. I realized that Tuck Everlasting and Watership Down have become one file in my head. And so when you said Tuck Everlasting,
okay.
I had Watership Down, which is a really disturbing movie.
Oh, that's sad. It's outright disturbing. Yeah. And it's a cartoon-ish animated.
We're not talking about rabbits. We're talking about people who live forever. So
yes.
Thank you for clarifying that. because my mind had messed it up.
So, Tuck Everlasting, maybe a family film, younger kids, real young,
Is it on
definitely.
Disney Plus, or what prompted
It
you
is on
to
Disney
find it?
Plus. It is on
Okay.
Disney Plus. So now that we've lingered in the Disney world,
Yes.
let's move on to some other family movies. Tom and Jerry, Bigfoot
Yes.
family.
Yes, we're covering all of the bases this week. There's animation for everybody. We have Tom and Jerry, Bigfoot family, and wait for it, the SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run. So Tom and Jerry, yes, is that Tom and Jerry. I had looked it up earlier this week. They have been around since 1940. So this cat and mouse are 81 years old, which in cat years is like, we're talking biblical numbers at this point, right? Miraculously, they never age. It's like Spider-Man. Spider-Man never gets older. Whatever. Rift in the space-time continuum. There, I'll be nerdy again for a minute. This is a Tom and Jerry story that is mashed up with live action, a live action story. Chloe Grace Moretz plays a 20-something who works at a really posh New York hotel. There's a big wedding that's going to be there. And Jerry has moved in and made himself at home because, as a mouse, he just wants the best. And she's charged with getting rid of the mice. She hires Tom the cat. And you know what happens next? Tom and Jerry happen next. There are a couple OMGs. That's about as bad as anything gets here. But it's basically a Tom and Jerry cartoon stretched out to 2 hours with Chloe Grace Moretz, which is a mouthful to say, sort of providing comic relief in between there.
Okay, is it worth a see? I mean, do you get what you expect? That's really the question. Not is it worth a see, but really, is it what we expect of Tom and Jerry? We have seen cartoons and cartoons that were made into live action that you're going, that's not the film that I thought it would be. So
it's what you would expect. And honestly, it's so much what you can expect that I would just go to YouTube and watch Tom and Jerry and save your money. Watch it it's sort of like the Saturday Night Live skits that work as 10-minute skits. They're hysterical. But then when they try to stretch them into 2 hours, it's a disaster. And I'm looking at you, Night at the Roxbury. Funny for 5 minutes, if inappropriate. 2 hours is torture. So do we 2-hour Tom and Jerry movie? Probably not. But if you love Tom and Jerry, I don't think you're going to be radically disappointed.
And it may be something that kids can watch without too much worry.
Too much worry. No,
okay.
And it's on HBO Max and in theaters. So it's a Warner Brothers property. It's one of their 21 movies that they're doing that with this year.
Well, if I see it, I'll wait till it comes out on, whatever streaming service I happen to have for free. But exactly. Bigfoot family looks kind of cute, actually.
It's kind of cute. If you got a Bigfoot hankering, it sort of gets the job done. It's a sort of... it's an environmentalist parable of sorts, and I think the more that cause is important to you, the more you will resonate with this movie.
Okay, so let me stop you. Does that mean it's kind of preachy? Because I, for one, am tired of politics everywhere. You can't go to a coffee shop without getting a shot or two of politics in your latte. Right. So I don't want to be preached at unless I'm going to church.
Skip this one.
Okay.
This is a movie in which Bigfoot, who it turns out used to be a human being named Dr. Harrison, conducted some genetic experiments, became Bigfoot, somehow had a family. I'm not sure. Just don't ask. It just is what it is. Just accept it. He has a son named Adam, which is a good name. His son does not have fur. They both have superpowers, and they face off against an evil oil company that wants to pollute the environment, and they want to have the evil oil company not pollute the environment. So that's the story.
Okay, because that's what evil oil companies always want to do.
Well, honestly, is there an oil company in a movie that is not also evil?
Well,
I would,
no, and that's kind of part of the sadness of it is that we oversimplify. Man, I
right.
am all about protecting the environment. The environment is important. We should be great
Yeah,
caretakers. We just did a
absolutely.
show on Tuesday, so if you're watching this, you may want to hop over to My Michelle Live and watch our Sci-Tech talk show. We had Dr. Hugh Ross. We had, I mean, we talked about not anti-climate change, certainly, but what is
Right.
really going on and what are real solutions beyond the politics. And so I think if we start real young with kids saying, oh no, it's just oversimplified and, these people are evil, then, we can indoctrinate them into groupthink at an early age. So I stay away from
Right.
movies like that.
Well,
Go
and
away.
it's
Don't
like
want
so
it.
many things. I feel like it has been, in some quarters, it's woven into the progressive dogma. And as Christians, we ought to be at the front of the line of people who have been charged in Genesis with being stewards of God's creation. I
Hmm.
mean, that was the first job that we were given. And so we have a responsibility to ask the question, what does it look like for us to be good stewards? But by the same token, it's not a religion, and we don't worship the environment. And at some point, and I'm way off on a tangent here, but the environmental thing can almost have a religious or a quasi-religious vibe to it the further into that sort of super progressive left area that you get. But I'll stop now before I get in trouble.
Well, where would this interaction between you and I be if we didn't go down some kind of
If I
tangent? I mean,
wasn't potentially fired for something I said, yeah,
it keeps it on the edge. It keeps it on the
right?
edge. All right, let's just go to something that I'm hopefully you can't go wrong with. This movie, SpongeBob on the Run.
So there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people who like SpongeBob and people who don't. Weirdly enough, I thought I was the kind that didn't like SpongeBob. And then my kids started watching it, and I started watching it with them. I'm like, okay, I can do without that underwear joke. I can do without this thing that's mm, mildly inappropriate, but mostly just inane, right? I mean, it's more ridiculous than inappropriate. Um, and we went through this SpongeBob phase together, and I came out the other end kind of a closet SpongeBob fan. It's funny, but it's geeky funny,
It is
uh,
funny.
and,
And
and
I
kind
know
of
that a lot
ridiculous.
of people read into it, and uh, that's where I'm not going to fault you. You have to do you. You have to do your family. But some of the things that maybe we see as inappropriate, we ascribe inappropriateness. I don't get the
Right.
feeling that that's the intention. It's just, excuse me, meant to be silly and
It's just silly.
funny.
And it's inane to a fault. Like my daughters got turned on to it,
Excuse me.
and we went through this SpongeBob binge phase, and I'm like, okay, one episode's funny, guys. You're on your third one. Go get some orange juice. Go outside, play. Let's take a break, right? But this is the thing I like about SpongeBob is there is a really earnest affection for relationship. That SpongeBob is a character who cares about the other people. Well, none of them are people. The other characters in his world, and in this one, his BFF snail friend Gary gets snail napped, and so SpongeBob and Patrick have to head off to find who took Gary. Why would you take why would you take a snail? Well, it turns out there's a bad character out there who likes eating snails. So, you
Ooh,
know, SpongeBob is on the case. Like I said, you're either
escargot.
into SpongeBob and you're like, oh, cool, another SpongeBob movie, or you're like, I don't think so. So,
Okay.
and there's some vanity, there's some mildly inappropriate stuff. One of the things that's a little bit concerning here, content wise, there are multiple scenes with characters gambling. And so they kind of turn gambling into a joke. And I think that is not an issue that we should treat lightly. And it's one that I think our culture, increasingly gambling is a so what issue. But I grew up in a time when gambling was a no-no. If you wanted to gamble, you would go to Las Vegas, and good people didn't do that. I mean, that's sort of where I grew up in Iowa in the 1970s and 80s. But I think that we don't want to minimize gambling and gambling addiction as an issue, and there's a little bit of that here. So that's probably one of the bigger issues that people should know about. But again, you can read our full review and see if this is something you think your family can navigate or not.
And that's at pluggedin.com, where I also found that
Correct.
there is a TV show, new TV show, SpongeBob Underyears.
Yes. And honestly, you caught me. Yeah. Michelle, more than anybody I talk to each week, you managed to pick the one thing that I have not actually read. So we talked about earlier is our TV guy, and he edits and publishes and puts up most of our TV reviews. So I have not actually read that one yet. It was on my list for this week. So I'm going to guess, even though guessing is not a smart thing to do, that we're in similar territory. But
yeah, I'm not real familiar with it, but I did notice it, and I thought it was worth a mention. I'm looking at the Plugged In website, Camp Coral, SpongeBob's Underyears. It looks like it's for the younger audience. Speaking of indoctrination, you can indoctrinate your kids into the SpongeBob world nice and early. So,
and let me just go back and say, there was a huge controversy back in the day about, is there some sort of homosexual undercurrent to SpongeBob? Mm-hmm. And I love what you had to say about it. We all bring our own stuff to this, and we have to sort of think through these things ourselves, but I don't think it's intended. What's changed from when that controversy happened is now we have all sorts of kids programming that has an explicit and intentional message in that direction. And so it's funny, what was once controversial is like now, no, SpongeBob's pretty much the same as it's always been. Mm-hmm. But we do these other things. We have to be paying attention to what the culture is dealing with this issue.
Well, that's where I wanted to get into one of our rabbit trails, if you don't mind, and that is...
Oh, I love rabbit trails.
We are engaged in this world in a pretty heavy cancel culture. But what we've seen before, but we've also seen it in the faith-based realm, where we have canceled out anything that we think. And the Bible says, stay away from all appearances of evil. So I get that, but where does staying away from something, protecting my family, and seeing demons under every rock and ascribing things that may not be there, and then canceling off, where have we set the stage for what we're seeing today, just on from another angle?
I think that's a great question, and I think as Christians, sometimes in the name of excuse me, in the name of something like purity, I think that we can throw the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. We can maybe ascribe motivation or intent based on very little evidence when it wasn't there. That was not the intent, and it's not actually there. And I think what we hope that Plugged In helps you do is to think deeply about the stuff that is there. And we all have to make decisions about what's appropriate, what is inappropriate, and how we respond to those things with our family. And as you said, I think that certainly there are pockets where we do throw a lot of things out, whereas I think that not to say that that's wrong, but we want to encourage people to think critically and theologically about all of this stuff. And there's nuance there. It's not just a soundbite. It's not usually all black or all white. Most things have a whole bunch of stuff that's in between, and we want to engage with that, and we want to teach our kids how to think critically about that, so that when they're out in the world and they don't have us making those decisions for them, mm-hmm. they know how to engage with it wisely and biblically.
You use the word engage, and I think that's part of the importance of it. When you're seeing something that's outright in your face, you sometimes you got to walk away. When you see things and we can ascribe things, can we instead use it as a point of engagement? Look, there is truth to who God is. There's truth to a hope that's in the gospel message. There's truth in Jesus Christ. And man, it's exciting. But, on one end, we're not hardcore salesmen going, that should be going door to door and stuffing it down, someone's gullet when they're not interested. If God's calling you and you're looking for answers, we should be there. And sometimes we can utilize common grounds, things that we've seen. We can can we say we can Paul AC it? We can take some of the things that we see.
I will tell him that you turned him into a verb. He will love that.
We can take the things that we see, shared experiences, movies, and say, you know what? Isn't this kind of pointing to something that is a deeper story, like what we find on MyMichelleLive, the God story, looking for that deeper story. I read a book, and I wish I had it here because I want to recommend it to you. And I'm going to be speaking with him again. He's written a book, The Unknown God, and Matthew Paul, I believe is his name. Forgive me, Matthew, if I got your last name wrong. But he wrote a book talking about every religion has like an avatar or a savior kind of a thing that tries to be what we're all looking for, the real true God in the person of Jesus Christ. They don't get there, but they have something that shows that that's what they're really looking for. And so what many people are doing, like Daniel Kikava with the Aloha Keakua Ministries, going through into indigenous people who already have an unknown God, so to speak, a God that of creation, and saying, you know what, this is what you're really looking for. So it's about engagement. And we can do that with movies. There's sometimes you walk away, and other times, instead of looking for demons under every rock, use it as a learning moment for your kids. Maybe just tossing it out there.
Well, and I think that we can circle back to Raya and the Last Dragon as an example. Here's something that it clearly draws from Chinese mythological culture. It deals with magic. There's a different creation story. Now, you could look at that and rightly say, because of all of those things, our family's going to avoid that. That is totally legitimate. You can make that decision. I also think it's a legitimate decision to say, here's an opportunity to engage with a story and do some comparative religion work. And I have a degree in religion from a secular university, so I'm not afraid of doing comparative religion. And because of our faith, we have a muscular faith, Michelle. We have a muscular worldview. We can, with confidence, talk about ideas from different worldviews and say, well, what is similar to Christianity? What is different? What do we make of that? And we don't have to be afraid of that. And I think a movie like Raya and the Last Dragon is one you could do all sorts of Paul AC bridges to Christianity, even though I'm reasonably certain that that was not the intent of the people who made it. But man, they're right there to have those conversations. And we don't have to be afraid of that.
That's right. That is right. I wanted to take some time and look at the Plugged In Movie Awards for 2021. Tell me about, have they already been decided, or are they still up for discussion?
They are still up for discussion. We will be announcing our pick and our readers' picks on March 19th, Friday, March 19th. And if you have not been to our blog and you're not familiar with it, each year for about a dozen years now, we have 4 categories: best movies for kids, for teens, for families, and best Christian movie, where we nominate 5 different films. If you go to our blog, which is just pluggedin.com/blog, and scroll down a little bit, you'll see our 4 entries. So there's one blog entry for each categories.
Okay.
You can see what we have nominated, and then you can vote either right there on the blog, or you can go to our Instagram or Facebook pages and vote there. And so on the 19th, we're going to reveal, we're actually going to do a podcast where we do a reveal of our conversation about what we're choosing as a team. And then in the blog, we'll also reveal what the readers' picks were.
Outstanding. So, best movie for kids, best movies for teens, movies for adults, and Christian movies. Maybe next week we can really delve into all of those, because you'll still have just under a week and that whole weekend to do nothing but plug into those potential movies for potential plugged in 2021 awards. So that will be good. It's about time in our discussion where we talk about the hits and the misses, at least one movie, television show, something we'd like to recommend, and something to stay clear of. And I do not mind starting. Something that I just want to get the ugly out of the way first. I not only didn't like it, I would put this in the hate it category. Hate it. Don't waste your time. Netflix, I Care a Lot. What a miserable, horrible film. It is nasty in just about every way. It feels horrible from the beginning, the unfairness, the ugliness. And I will be honest, I fast forwarded through 80% of it. I wanted to see, is there a redemptive message? Is there, does it turn out? No, there really is not.
No, it just takes weirdness and nastiness and puts another huge dollop on top. I mean,
glorifies it, and it's sad.
Totally.
It's just, there's nothing. There really, I think the only good thing. The only good thing in this movie is a son that does indeed love his mother, and you see that at least in a couple of scenes. And when he holds her at one point, you can see that he loves her. That's the only thing. So if you really have to see the movie, just fast forward to that part, watch 3 seconds of a son giving a mother a hug, and move on to something else.
Yeah, and it's about a woman who shamelessly manipulates elderly people into being in their
guardian. She becomes their guardian, and then steals everything from them, puts them in homes that they live miserable existence, completely separated from their families. She separates them from everyone, and it's just horrific abuse.
And then there's a weird sort of moralistic twist where she maybe gets a little bit of her own medicine back at her, but it's not even satisfying. I mean, it's just, the whole thing's just kind of gross.
Yeah.
I mean,
so I care a lot about my integrity and my time, so I will stay away from I Care a Lot, and I hope you do too. But one thing I did love, and this is more for adults, but not in it's an adult movie type sense at all. It's Julian Fellows who put together Downton Abbey. Julian Fellows presents Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne is it's a beautiful kind of along the lines of Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen type, but one that I had not seen. Really well done. It's in kind of a mini series form, and I binged watched it and loved it. It was well done. It had a good message. It was just lovely. I loved it.
Well, I'm gonna go in a pretty bizarre direction for my picks this week, because what I'm gonna recommend is rated R, and what I'm gonna say stay away from was actually totally innocuous the first time around. It's rare that I would say, here's an R-rated movie that is worth your potential consideration, but this is, you'll understand the exception when I say it. There's a new documentary out on Netflix on the singer Billie Eilish, and it's called The World's a Little Blurry. So Billie Eilish exploded onto the scene 6 years ago when she was 13. She grew up in an entertainment family. Her parents worked in the industry in Los Angeles. She was homeschooled. She has a really interesting story. She has Tourette's syndrome. She has wrestled with depression and a lot of darkness in her life. She uploaded this song, and overnight, I mean, it was sort of like the definition of a viral phenomenon. And 6 years later, she continues to be a voice for, I guess, Gen Z, that she's shockingly raw at times. Her music can be hard to listen to, and she deals with difficult subjects. And that's the case with this documentary. It's rated R primarily for some harsh profanity. So it's not something I would watch with a 12-year-old, but I think if you have a son or a daughter who is into Billie Eilish, I always want to call her Eilish, but it's Eilish. You owe it to yourself, if you have Apple TV Plus, to watch this, just to get a sense of who is this person. And she's incredibly creative. She's pretty thoughtful. There's also enormous darkness in there. I mean, she talks about depression. She talks about suicide. She talks about cutting. She talks about the stuff that she's been through. And I think it's an important film because it's so representative of where so many kids are today. And it'll help you understand where she is coming from. And depending on, how old your kids are and if they are fans, maybe you watch it with them and you have a conversation about, well, what's going on with her? What's her worldview? Where is she coming from? What do you identify with? What are you concerned about? Because there's some things to be concerned about here. So interesting film.
Yeah, I concur. It kind of gives you an inside look into Gen Z, which
Yes.
Gen Z still hasn't figured out Gen Z. So,
Right.
and you hear
Thankfully,
it in
Gen
her
X is
music.
on the job, though, and we're figuring it out and putting them all in their little boxes. No. Yeah, exactly. You're
Yeah.
welcome, Gen Z. We're always here for you.
I like it. And Billie Eilish. Not my kind of music. It's very emo, but
super catchy. I mean,
and creative. Beyond
create-
beyond the in the box same six writers for
Oh, man.
the pretty people kind of music. So I love it in that. So what is your stay away from, your miss
All right.
of the week?
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Punky Brewster is back, and
Oh,
Punky
no.
Brewster is not worth your time.
Okay.
So some of us of a certain tender age, and we're not talking to you, Gen Z. We're now talking to fellow Gen Xers. Remember Soleil Moon Frye from the 80s as kind of an orphan outsider kid who gets adopted into this family, and great messages about adoption. Those messages are still here in this latter-day reboot. She has gone through a divorce. She has a couple of her own children, adopted children, foster children. There's some great messages here about family, but man, there's some nasty, inappropriate stuff that I'm just like, is somebody getting paid to make sure we have a couple wink, wink, dirty jokes in here? And I personally, where I sort of get my moral indignation all riled up is when people take things that are mostly pure and there's this determination to naughty it up. And there's not a lot, but my tolerance for it is really low, personally. There's a veiled joke referencing pubic hair. And I'm like, no, I don't need pubic hair in a Punky Brewster episode.
Yeah.
I just don't. It's not necessary. And so I get frustrated. That's where I get frustrated with stuff that is, in a lot of ways, pretty gentle, pretty family oriented. And then we just throw that kind of stuff in there. So
I'm with you there. So it's good to know all of the things that we talked about. You can, in one way or another, find them on pluggedin.com, where they have movies and books, games, TV, YouTube channels. It's everything you need for pop culture right there at your fingertips, so you can make the best decision for your family. And you can also find Adam. Adam, you have blogs up all the time. So lots of cool ways that you can connect with not not only your family, entertainment, but Adam as well, as we get you plugged in. And, just so that we don't overcool you, Big Voice Guy did
Let's
this.
get you plugged in.
Thanks, Big Voice Guy. And thanks, Adam. We'll catch you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Michelle.